to the Big John Bass Show. Welcome to the Big John Bass Show.
Hello, legends. Welcome to the Big John Bass Show. I'm your host, Big John Bass. Firstly, thank you for joining me once again. This is season 1, episode 7. Anything going on? I don't know. Loads. How's everyone doing? It's Winter Olympics. I'm watching loads of that. It's been pretty good. Saw a few people nearly get like completely KO'd on ski jumping. That was pretty fun. I don't even know if it's called that. They just call it like mental stuff. It's like super free ski jump flying, and then basically they start at the top, they go down, there's a big jump, they do a trick and land, but sometimes they don't land, or they just land on their neck or their arm or something, and they just KO and they just sort of slide down the ice and the snow. Quite enjoying that, and I've quite enjoyed no football. Well, no Spurs, and if Spurs aren't on, then I just use it as an opportunity not to watch football. So it was great. Didn't watch any of the weekend's football, no FA Cup, no nothing. Just enjoyed myself. Rubbish weather at the weekend. Also Valentine's Day. If you enjoy that and you're celebrating that, had a nice time, good for you. Not really a big thing in my house. We watched, we stayed in, I had my wife's mum over and some friends, and we watched Bodyguard with a takeaway. Romantic. My wife, she's a lucky lady. Lots going on. It's been a pretty big change since we last recorded. Now, for those of you who listen every week, 1, legends, love you. 2, you will know that it sort of happened live, that Frank got sacked. So I did catch it and did have a chance to speak about it a bit, but I do want to sort of talk a bit more about the end of Frank's reign. I want to go into Igor Tudor, our new interim manager, talk a bit more about what he needs to do and how that's going to work. Also today, as I record, Heitinga has gone. He's been let go after 33 days. So I want to talk about like Lange and Vinai and the decision-making process around Frank's reign, because I think that that's been pretty chaotic. And then I do also want to sort of very high level preview the Scum game. And I say high level because we don't know much about Igor Tudor, what he's going to do, but I do want to talk about that game because obviously it's such an important moment for us. So let's go back a couple of steps. Let's talk about the end of Frank's reign. So I think, my initial reaction, as I said on the podcast, was like I was relieved, right? I felt good that he had gone. It felt like, in a weird way, I'd kind of come around to this idea that we were never going to get rid of him and that he was not going to be let go by Vinai and Lange. And they just decided, no, we're sticking with him. This is the way it's got to be. And I just thought they weren't going to sack him, even after that Newcastle result. And I said as much on the pod, right? If you were listening last week, most of the podcast was me going, he should go, but he probably won't. So, here's what I think we should do. So I was relieved. I was pleased that he went. He's, now it's been a few days and we can really take a step back. It's been a disaster, hasn't it? Like, really, we spent a lot of money on bringing him and his staff, and we'll get into Heitinga in a minute, but like adding extra people in, and the football's been bad. The results have been bad. The sort of culture around the dressing room, in the stadium, it just seems like apathy across the board has set in. It's, not even, most people don't hate Thomas Frank or didn't hate Thomas Frank. They just didn't care. He made them just so unconnected with the club and this sense of just, I don't care anymore. And in a way that's just worse, isn't it? Like just feeling like bleh about your club just feels worse than being angry or being, super happy or frustrated. Just feeling nothing is just this horrible way of feeling. So it was the right decision to sack him, but it definitely was too late. And again, we'll get into Vinai and Lange a little bit later on, but leaving it until after the transfer window, it's just psychotic, isn't it? Like just stupid. Really, really stupid way to think about things. And this is one of the things that I do think I was right on. I thought they might keep him because, and this is the bit that I was right on, is that I just genuinely don't think Lange and Vinai really thought it was a big problem, or they hadn't really got to where we'd all got to in terms of really seeing what a problem this is and was. And that's why I think he was left in the job for so long, when it was abundantly clear to most of us that he was not the right man for months. And so when it got past the transfer window, that's why I was so like, they're not going to sack him, because they just cannot see it. They're just so blinded by it. And there are some reports, and how much of this stuff's true, we don't know, but there are some reports that they still didn't want to sack him, and that actually the Lewis family did overrule them in the end and booted him out. And that's why it's been such a sort of short turnaround time, and that they had to, look at this interim thing so quickly, because basically Vinai and Lange weren't prepared for it, which chimes perfectly with what they've been doing all season, and chimes with my idea that, he was obsessed with, well, it worked with Arteta, just got to stick with him long enough and it will come good, which, as we know and as we've seen, just, isn't the case always. So definitely the right decision, definitely too late. And this is, now we need to sort of separate why, right? Because I think for longer term, these are some of the areas that I think we need to think about who should be the next manager on a long-term basis. We'll get into Igor Tudor, do not worry. But I want to talk about why Frank lost his job and why it was such a disaster, because I think that will help us think about what we should be thinking about from a new manager perspective in the summer. And so the big one for me was the style of play. Now, I know, and I said this on the Fighting Cock recently, that the players are also accountable. Could the players have played better? Do we have some players that are duds that need replacing? Yes. But we also have players who are capable of playing better than this. I'm convinced by it. A lot of these are internationals, so they can perform better. And look, you only have to use your eyes to see that the style of football we were playing was complete garbage. Garbage, right? Banging balls up the line to Kudus originally until he got injured, and then firing balls into Solanke and Odebear over the top. It's not a tactic. It's really not. Like, it's just a painful misrepresentation of what I think people think football has become, right? You've heard a lot about it's a really physical game now. They're all athletes. They're all shutting people down, and it's much more physical, and that's why the Premier League teams do well in Europe, because they can run everyone over. Sure, that there's elements of truth to all of those things, but that doesn't mean that you can only play in a long ball, direct, physical way and rely on set pieces. Like, that's the only way to play. I just really disagree with that. And one of the things that Harry Brooks was talking about on the recent episode of The Lab with Flab, which is a really good episode if you haven't listened to it, and always worth listening to Harry. He's talking about like the environment in which you can create for players and the platform that you can create. And there isn't like one prevailing way to play football. There's a number of different systems and ways to play football. And I think this is where we've gone really wrong with Frank, is that the environment that he wants to create and the sort of platform that he wants to give is just not conducive to what we would all consider to be sort of interesting and fun and exciting football. And it becomes this sort of game of duels. Who's going to win the most duels? When the ball drops, who's going to get there first? How can we win that? And having been, a very mediocre Sunday League footballer, even at my rubbish level of football, when it starts getting scrappy and just winning duels, that's the bit, no one loves that bit, do they? I mean, a few players do like that sort of stuff, but in the main, you want to get the ball down, get it moving. How can we create goals? How do we attack? How do we make things more creative? And, the best players that you watch can do something different and are given the freedom and the confidence to try things in the final third. But Frank is one of many current managers who are just reliant on this idea of systems and you've got to play this certain way. And when he moves here, you do this, and this is how we're going to win. And I think it's sort of just the antithesis of what Spurs as a idea, as a concept of the way that we play and the things that we like is about, right? It's just so different to what we want to see. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. And it doesn't mean that he won't go on and do well at another club, because, each circumstance is different. And it's not about whether managers are good or bad, I don't think, at this level. It's more just are they a good or bad fit? And I just really feel that Frank's football and his style of play was just a bad fit. Then you're seeing all this stuff coming out about, the fact that Brentford have this system and that loads of managers have been successful there because they operate on this system. And now he's outside of that system. It's sort of all come tumbling down. I think there's a lot of weight to that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And, we've seen that before with other clubs like Brighton, for example, where they seem to just plug and play with a manager and they come in and they're just really successful. I think that's fine for a certain type of club. And when you reach those pinnacles, those bigger teams with bigger expectations and a more sort of well-informed identity, let's say, that just doesn't work, right? Like it's a different imprint. You've got a different type of mentality. And again, I spoke about this on the Fighting Cock, this idea of Frank's that it's a no dickheads policy, but you can't control that. And it's a metric that's unmeasurable. Like someone that you think's really great, other people might think is a dickhead, right? You lot are listening to me now. Hopefully you don't think I'm a dickhead. There'll be other people that will listen to this and go, this guy's a dickhead. I don't want to listen to it again. So how do you measure it, right? Like if someone put together a podcast list and it was like, oh, no dickhead podcasts, well, you send it to 10 different people and they're going to have a problem with one of those podcasts. They're going to think someone's a dickhead. So this idea to me is just a way to create a lack of friction, right? It's just more malleable people, more yes men, let's say, more people that just aren't going to cause quote unquote issues. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, I was talking to Harry Brooks on Twitter about this. Like we've all played, if you've ever played any sport, competitive sport of any kind, in a team, there'll be people that argue and row, and sometimes there's bust-ups in the dressing room, and there's stories of, the Man United treble-winning team with Sheringham and Cole. They didn't speak to each other, and they hate each other, and there was fights in the dressing room. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes a bit of needle, a bit of, accountability through sort of aggression is good. And again, this is without going to Yada. This is the sort of stuff that gets lost, I think, in modern football. Or it's not lost, it's that people are trying to remove it with the absence of talking about it. Like, there aren't rows in dressing rooms now between players, and like there isn't a level of like, to use the modern parlance, like toxic masculinity. Like these are all like alpha athletes to a real high level, like they're super competitive. You need to be able to have some confrontation and conflict. Like we all saw that clip of Sonny and Lloris going mental at each other in the dressing room. That's not a bad thing. They didn't hate each other. People were going mad about that clip. That happens probably every other game, or it should do, right? Because they should be holding each other accountable. And again, that's an environment thing. The manager needs to set an environment where players are willing to challenge each other, where people are prepared to raise the standards. Do we have players with the right mentality for that? I don't know. But this idea of a no dickheads policy, to me, doesn't necessarily always mean a positive thing. The idea is a good one, right? And certainly in businesses I've worked in, you want to create a culture where people are, generally speaking, decent people. That's fine. But this idea of like, you just want no one that's going to challenge, nobody that's going to have this way of working, I just think is never going to materialize in real life. And also, look, if you join a business or you join a team, you don't get to decide who's a dickhead and who's not, right? You are in life, always, there will be dickheads. How you approach them and how you overcome them, how you manage them, how you sidestep them, that's what matters. That's what's important. We can't sanitize the world, right? You've got to find a way to cope and get round and maybe turn that to your advantage, right? And that's what I think the likes of Thomas Frank, they represent this idea of, well, we don't want any of that. Well, sorry, that's not how the world works. You need to have a bit of it and get over it. And if you can't, that's a problem. Second major thing, aside from the style of play, which was absolute garbage, that was one of my main gripes with him. But the main one is results. We were absolutely shite. We were shite. We were conceding goals left, right and centre. We were terrible. That's a major problem. And something that will, be forever on his permanent record for him, sadly, which is that, it's one of the worst win ratios of any manager we've ever had, and one of the worst just string of results. Like, we just consistently lose. The home form particularly was absolutely horrendous. So that was a reason. And then, like I said, dressing room, he clearly didn't get that on side. This idea as well that the media were protecting him. Definitely. Definitely. The stick that Ange got, if you think that was deserved, then where was that same level for Frank? Like, where was it? It was almost like people just forgot that we were terrible and they weren't talking about it like it wasn't an issue. Whilst we're all melting down going, we're hurtling towards relegation, it seemed like the media were like, no, it's not really his fault, it's everybody else's. Now, there are lots of other issues which we will get into about the club, but just letting him off the hook just doesn't make sense when those exact same other issues were there for Ange and he didn't get anywhere near that amount of grief. So, look, the whole thing with Thomas Frank is unfortunately, a real big stain on the club. He is the worst manager we've had, I think. I think it's hard to argue that he isn't. He's worse than Christian Gross. He just is. He's worse than Sherwood, Villas-Boas, Yol, Redknapp, Pochettino. He's probably worse than Nuno. He's worse than Conte, Stellini, Mason. He's the worst. He is the worst. Santini. Name anyone you want. He is the worst. So, good riddance, I guess, sounds a bit extreme. I have no ill feeling towards him as a person. Just a massive misstep. And this is the real worry. And left us in a hell of a position, which we now have to recover from. So, that brings me on to Mr. Igor Tudor. I'm a big fan of big men, as we know. Right, a fellow big man, Igor Tudor. I remember him from Champman back in the day. Juve, bit of a utility man, centre-back, CDM, solid, just a player you'd keep around, never caused a fuss, and nice and simple. And since he's come in, I've listened to every podcast I could get hold of, right? The Lab, Fighting Cock, Rule the Roost, the whole landscape of pods in this area, right? And I've missed a few off there, Extra Inch, etc. And if Ricky's listening to this, he hates it when anyone mentions other pods. And I'm sorry, Rick, because I love you dearly. I don't mean to wind you up, but I just like to, if I've listened to something, I like to credit the people I've listened to. But the Fighting Cock is always my home. So go and listen to the Fighting Cock or the Lab first before you listen to those others I mentioned. Anyway, I've listened to all of them, right? So I've now got a bit more knowledge on Igor Tudor. So I was umming and ahhing, do I need to do we've just made this appointment of Igor Tudor. Do I need to do that? And I thought, no, I'll wait, because I think if you listen to this pod, this is my idea for this podcast was pods usually drop sort of Monday, Tuesday. Everybody listens to them on Monday and Tuesday. And then come Wednesday, you've kind of got nothing to listen to. And then the same thing happens at the end of the week. So I just thought I'd wait so I can have a bit of time to reflect. So I've listened to this, and I guess there's always two sides to it with a manager for me. There's like the football inside, the way they play, what they're going to do on the pitch. And then there's like their character and how they're going to implement that sort of character to the club and like how that's going to play out. So let me start with what I thought about him off the pitch, or from what I've learned, right? It sounds like he's very much a sort of old school disciplinarian, not going to take any shit, happy to have a stand-up row with a player and get involved. That is good for short term. What we need is a course correction, right? It seems like, again, from all the information we're getting from the fallout of the Thomas Frank era, they just didn't respect him, right? They just, Swindon lot, think you're a slug. So they just don't respect him. You need someone who's going to come in and get people's respect. One, he is physically intimidating. He's a big lump, and he's not, physically he's imposing, right? He's not going to be scared of any of these players. He doesn't care. And he'll be, I think, command that respect just because of his demeanour, right? Instantly. Just on a human level, that is, right? Then he can legitimately talk about his time at big clubs like Juventus, like Marseille, like Lazio. And I think that does carry some weight, right? Like, he knows his way around an established large club. I mean, particularly in Juve's case, right? It's the biggest club in Italy, arguably. And, he's been a player there, he's managed there. I think that will give him some standing that he can take in this short term. So I think there's that. I think there's an element of like he's done interim essentially, or like short-term jobs where he's had an objective, get us into the top 4 or get us into this position, and he's delivered that. And I think he probably has a bit of a blueprint of how to make that short-term impact work. Now, we've seen that it hasn't really worked from a longer-term view, which is fine. We don't need it to. I am seeing this very much as like, this is interim, regardless of how, if we win every single game between now and the end of the season, I still don't want him to be our manager next season because, as I'll get into, I don't think his football is conducive to what we want. And also, it sounds like personality-wise, that just won't do well enough for long term. But we saw with a manager like a Conte, for example, you come in with high standards, you really intimidate the players, for want of a better word, and you drive that. In the short term, you can get a lot of results. When Conte first came in, we really did do well, but longer term, it didn't quite work. And Tudor is sort of from this Juventus Lippi fallout, right? Of that Marcello Lippi era of Juventus players who've gone on to manage. They have a similar ethos. Again, this is not something that I didn't, that I figured out. This was something that I've learned from these podcasts. But I thought that was really interesting because obviously Marcello Lippi super successful with Juve in Italy. So yeah, that was interesting. And then that's his sort of aura, as the kids say. That's his personality type. I think that's what we need. We need a disciplinarian, someone who's going to come in and whip him into shape. You got to stay up. That's rule number 1. From a footballing perspective, look, I'm not super excited about the football, I've got to be honest. It's going to, by the sounds of it, going to be a back 3. It's going to be, aggressive pressing, but it will be fairly defensive. It'll be a 3. For all intents and purposes, it'll be a 5 when we're defending. And the wing-backs will very much drop in. And the play is going to be quite direct. So it's not going to be a massive departure from what we've seen under Thomas Frank. That's not great, but again, needs must. We just need to get out of this terrible position we find ourselves in the league. We just need to find points from somewhere. And actually, we weren't good defensively under Thomas Frank, despite the fact that we played in a way that wasn't good attacking either. So I don't mind a bit of defensive solidity as long as we're getting points at this moment in time. So hopefully we can do that, and he can find a way to get us into a point where we can actually get some points on the board, because that is what we need. Also heard that, Kolo Muani did well under him. He's been absolutely terrible. I want him gone. But you have to give someone like Tudor, who's worked with him before, a chance to get something out of him. And I would like to see how he can get the most out of him, because we do have a lack of players. And as much as I personally would just bomb him out, I don't have a previous relationship with Kolo Muani, but Igor Tudor does. So he has the ability to hopefully turn that good relationship into a good relationship that can be fruitful for Spurs on the pitch in the rest of his loan spell. So yeah, I think there's some hope there. I would like to see him, as I said on the last podcast, I would like to see him integrate some of those young players. I'd love to see Byfield given some minutes. I would love to see Williams-Barnett given some minutes as well. So hopefully there's room for a bit of a clean slate for players to come in and show him what they can do, and that we won't just see a continuation of what Frank was doing. He has got a bit of time with the players on the training pitch before the Scum game, and we will get into thoughts and expectations on that, but we'll see what happens. We have heard today, actually, sorry, just before I get into that, so just to round out my thoughts on Tudor, I do think basically this is in hindsight, a good short-term appointment, having now learned what I've learned about him, because he looks like a short-term type of guy. Comes in and gets an impact. That's kind of what we need. He's got to very quickly get these players on side, get some discipline, get them to understand the objective or what we're trying to do. And this idea that, look, I'm here for the short term, do what I say, and we'll get where we need to get to, and then I'll be gone. So let's just focus on doing this, I think can build us a good platform to survive. And then we go into next season with a new manager. So, that being said, he's now brought in a couple of extra members of backroom staff, and as a result of that, Heitinga has now gone, despite being at the club for just a mere 33 days. Cochrane has gone, and there's some other analysts and stuff who've left the club. We've kept the set-piece guy, which is good, because he's the one person from that team who actually performed pretty well. But this, to me, is quite worrying, right? Because a lot of people were saying when Heitinga came in, this is really good idea. This is really sensible, because if they are going to bomb him off, then he'll just slot in as the interim. Well, he hasn't. Because, again, I'm pretty sure Lange and Vinai didn't want to sack Frank, and that they brought Heitinga in to help him because they were desperate for it to work. Now, look, I was desperate for it to work. We all were, I'm sure. We wanted whoever's the manager to do well and be successful. So in some ways, I don't want to criticise them too much for trying to give their man the best chance of success. But it is just a bit pathetic that we've got to a point where we brought someone in who's quite well established for 33 days, and then he's just gone. That's just lack of foresight and planning here, and just embarrassing that we are, again, on certain, transfer deals or whatever, we've missed out on players for 2-3 mil. We've just burnt 20 million on backroom staff, just chucked it away down the drain, and we're making messes left, right, and centre that we all just forget about because they're not, player wages or transfers. They're sort of background. But the cost of bringing them all in and then getting rid of them all, and then we're going to have to hire another manager and another team in the summer, sort of unforgivable, really. And I do think there needs to be some real thought around what Vinai and Lange are actually doing. Now, if you listened a few weeks back to the Spurs DNA episode, which there'll be one next week, or the week after, the last week of the month, basically. That in that episode, I was talking about, for each level, so the playing side, the pitch, the manager, the players, and then you've got the sort of director of football level, and then you've got the ownership and CEO level. Each of those needs a bit more time, right, to really judge them. So, you can look at the players and the manager quite month to month almost and see, are we trending in the right direction? Are we seeing green shoots, etc.? What are the results like? Director of football is a season or two, are basically 4 transfer windows for me. It's that's enough to see if this person's been effective or not. And then when you get to the board level, maybe you need, a couple of seasons really to see. But when they start making major issues like with Vinai that we're seeing now with this Thomas Frank situation, it's been handled so badly. It does make me question his judgment. First of all, you had the whole, this was a 30-man list, and this was the guy we picked, and these are the reasons. Well, it shows a real lack of understanding of what you actually need and what you required. And, I said before that I think it's a obsession with, we've got to be like these data clubs. It's all about data. We need a manager who can work in that system, despite not being one, right? We as a club might want to be bit more data-led. Fair enough. As much as I joke around about, no data, we need data and analysts in the football club if we really want to kick forward. But we don't have that structure. Then bringing in someone who's reliant on that structure is just foolish. It's just stupid. And we've done it again. We are a club that needs someone who is more of a figurehead, more of a sort of statesman, charismatic, can lead men. That's what we need as a manager of the men's first team. He doesn't seem to understand that. Just doesn't get it. Seemingly doesn't get it. And as for Lange, he's dropping absolute stinkers left, right, and centre. He's just not a director of football for me. He's like a youth team scout, or like a youth scout, someone who can find really talented young players. He just doesn't have what it takes, in my mind, from a personality type. We need someone who's sort of charismatic and driven and can understand the dynamics of a football club and what's important, the intangibles off the pitch, as well as identifying a good group of people for a recruitment department and analysts and data people that can find you those people, and then you can do the rest about the sort of culture and identity of the football club. Just Lange, really? And look, there's been a lot pointed out to me, which is Vinai left Arsenal. They're now competing on all fronts, look like they could win the lot. Lange left Villa. They've gone on and they're much better now, sort of in the title race and doing well. And then Frank and his team leave Brentford and they're flying up the table. So all of them basically left, come to us and are doing rubbish with us. And those other teams are now prospering. Maybe they are an issue. Now, I still stand by my point, which is we haven't necessarily given Vinai enough time to see if longer term he can look at these mistakes and correct them. right? Because I do think when he makes mistakes, they are massively impactful, right? And so it does take a bit more time to really judge if he can make good decisions. But he can't make too many more wrong ones, because that is going to put us in a real bad state. Lange has to go. He has to go. And if it is true that the Lewis family basically overruled Lange and Vinai, then enough from Lange, because the transfer window was a complete joke. He signed some real stinky players. If he doesn't want to take the job as chief youth scout or head of youth development, give him a fancy title, he has to go for me. We need a new director of football as part of this new manager in the summer. I hope it's Pochettino, and I would just let him pick who he wants as a director of football, and the two of them work together to carve out what is the Spurs identity. Pochettino, whether you want him in, want him out, whether you want him in, or you don't want him, that's fine. I understand there's reasons for that. But one thing I'm sure we can all agree is he genuinely loves the club. He has an affection, at the very least, for the club. And he gets what it is to be the manager. He should be one of the people that is helping to form this sort of group of people who are going to do what I suggested, which is almost like this complete head to toe. What is the Spurs DNA? What is this whole focus, the culture, the identity of the club? Let's map that out so that we can build director of football, recruitment teams, data analysts, physios. The whole football inside of the business is working towards this structure, this identity that we're trying to achieve. And until we set that, we're always going to flip-flop between different types of managers and different types of approaches. We need to be clear on what type of club we are. Are we trying to be a Brighton and a Brentford? I would suggest we're not, but we're trying to sort of somewhat copy their model, despite that's not what we want. We want to be more like a Real Madrid and a Barcelona, but we don't know what our identity is and we don't have the budget for it. What is it that we want to be? And we have to be clear on that from an ownership and CEO level, and then they need to hire director of football and manager and buy players that fit that whole identity. That's what we have to do. We have to get that right. And if we don't, we are going to be in this perpetual cycle of messing around for way too long. There's my customary little sip of water for the people out there that enjoy it. Because where I'm at now is, right, some of you are like, oh, I won't forgive John until he stops drinking on his podcast. And other people are like, oh, here we go. Here's the gulp counter. Expected gulps. XG. So I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't now. So what I've done is I've started to edit some of them out so that there's always at least one. So the expected gulps is always at 1 as a minimum. And then, if it's, I imagine in the summer, the XG is going to be through the roof because I'm going to be even more thirsty. Okay, let's fast forward. Scum game. Now, by the time this goes out, it'll be the middle of the week, so it'll be a few days until we get into the Arsenal game. So this will be, like I said, fairly high level, as we approach that game. And, I'm sure I'll be on various different podcasts talking about it anyway. It's going to be Tudor's first game in charge. I think he has an opportunity here to get a lot of goodwill and get a lot of the fans on side. We just want to see the players not be passive. Right, if you remember that last game, it was embarrassing against Arsenal. It was disgraceful. There was no fight. There was no pressure. It was just meek, mild, pathetic, embarrassing. I want to see us go to war in this game. And I don't mean doing a Romero and going high on people, but I mean getting in people. I want aggression from the players in a constructive way. The way that Palhinha does it, right? Palhinha is an aggressive player, but he's not like Romero at times where he's losing his head. It's focused aggression. I want that from the players. I want them to win every ball. I want them to, to hunt down the ball and really be prepared to show that fight. Because player for player, unfortunately, the scum are in a much better place than we are, right? But we know, and you see it all the time, the best team doesn't always win, right? The best team on paper doesn't always win. You can go into a game with an approach and really do something and shock a team. And will and desire and passion can get you far. People don't want to admit it, but it's true. So we just need to get into a point where we want it more than them. And that is the most cliched throwaway, they wanted it more than us. But sometimes it's true. right? And we've got to go into this game just desperate to get something from the game. That's the first thing. Second thing, I think Tudor has an opportunity to do something really interesting here. If you are Arteta a few weeks ago looking at this game, you knew exactly how to approach it because you knew what Thomas Frank was going to do. You know our limitations with the players. We do have the advantage of like a surprise attack. They don't know what to prepare for, really. They don't know how we're going to line up, what we're going to do. He's got a whole week basically to prepare and think about something interesting from a game plan perspective. I hope he uses it, right? I hope he thinks about something, doing something that might shock them. Because I do think, there'll be an expectation that we'll try and dig in and hit something on the counter and get set. I hope we do something different. And I'm not a tactics expert, but I feel like there is stuff that we could try and do that could just shock them, right? And just put it on them and put them in a position where they are underprepared for what we're trying to do. And again, it might mean, because there is definitely a quality deficit between us and them at the moment, that it ultimately doesn't mean we win or get a point. But again, I want the players to show willing. I want them to show us that they're on board and look, whilst this result is out of our reach, if we play like this, we will get results in the coming games, because the tone of this game will set the tone for how we feel about the next games coming up. And so there's a real chance here, like I said, to get the fans on side, show that want and desire, fight for every ball. And if we can, regardless of the result, if we can show that, the results will come if we play this way, I think that will really help. So look, if we were to get a shock win, that would genuinely be like, I would, forget the points side of things. I'd be like, we're definitely staying up, because that bounce, that goodwill, would just be sensational, like derail their title hopes and get ourselves 3 massive points that no one's expecting. Dreamland, absolute dreamland if we get a win. I think a battling point against them lot would be a really good result and realistic, as an opportunity for us to get it. And again, a battling, narrow defeat, as long as the way that we do it, that will also be enough to give us kind of what we need going forward. So, yeah, it's the tone of this game. Because, look, I think as much as we all want to be positive, not really many people going into this game with a load of confidence about the result. So the least we can do is help our expectations and our mood is to just get a good performance from the players and get the crowd on side. So we'll see how that kind of works out, and what we're going to do with it. And look, I'm just hoping that we get the new manager bounce, basically, right? Because that's really what we would like to have. So yeah, hopefully we can do that. So yeah, I just feel like we might win though. And I know I've just said no one sees it coming and no one's really saying we're going to win. I talk a lot about like storylines and feelings. I do feel like we're going to win. You heard it here first. We're going to win. We're going to win. It'll be narrow. It'll be like 2-1. And it'll be like scrappy as hell. But big Igor just giving it loads on the sideline, just fist pumping into the crowd like, yes, lads. And then everyone just like going mental. Igor Tudor's no army. Just be absolutely brilliant. So well up for that. Hopefully we can do it. Right. Let me, before I wrap up, let me get into your questions here. So we've got, let's have a look. Harold B1. How does Tudor compare in terms of aura to our previous managers? Well, he absolutely pisses it against Thomas Frank. Like, let's not overthink this, right? As I've said many times on the Fighting Cock, if you've listened to me on there over the years, ultimately what all things boil down to is who's harder than who. That's what everything boils down to, that. Let's be honest about it, right? You can have a disagreement with me, right? I might be right, and I can literally go, here is the facts, here's evidence or whatever, right? And if you're just bigger and harder than me, you go, I don't care, I'll just smash your head in. I've got to agree with you, haven't I? Ultimately, you will win. And through the history of time, we've seen, noble nations doing all sorts of... If you've got a bigger army, you just get what you want, right? So Tudor would absolutely batter Thomas Frank. He's probably the hardest manager we've ever had. Like, certainly of the modern era. Like, I can't think of a single manager who gets near Tudor in a scrap. double hard, mate, double hard. So he'd definitely be up there. Chase at Bread Coys. What you reckon Big Igor is packing? I'd say he's quite a girthy man. I don't reckon it's like really long, but I reckon it's like a Bedford van. It's like solid and round and just, girthy. That's what I'm going to say, Chase. Christian Collette. Which player do you think will have the biggest new manager bounce in performance under Tudor? I think Conor Gallagher is going to absolutely thrive in everything we've heard about Tudor being a mini Conte is accurate. Christian, great question. I do think that those players, like our midfielders, should thrive, and Conor Gallagher, in theory, should be that guy because he has got that mentality that I was speaking about. He does take ownership and leadership, and he is a press monster. Like his running stats are incredible. He's just a machine. For me, I hope it's less like individual players and that we just have a collective, like everybody just raises their game 10, 20%, and we see just like a bit of unity. And in a way, I kind of don't want players to stand out because I think that's where we've got at the moment where like one player has a decent game because everyone's so terrible. I'd just like us to just be consistent and for the team just to do well. So hopefully. MJB Hotspur. Do our last 2 trophy wins debunk the myth that winning a trophy changes the culture? On both occasions, we lost matches with a regularity that was unacceptable. Of course, trophies must be the aim, but normalising losing games regularly is clearly not a winning culture. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like the 2 occasions where we've won trophies, the League Cup and then the Europa League, sort of the league form was just horrendous around that time. Yeah, look, I guess it depends on what happens. I feel like in both cases there was like a big sharp turn to change things, and particularly with the Ange scenario. I think we could all agree that the league form under Ange was really bad. I personally was like, I know he's got his issues, but we can't just throw this Europa League winning momentum away. And this whole, season 3 is better than season 2 stuff. I was like, yeah, like let's give this a go because we did have a lot of injuries and yeah, maybe the football was rubbish, but maybe we did go for the Europa League. And we could have just found out and tried to build on that winning mentality. I think the problem is that that's gone now, right? So that sort of idea, we will never know because now we're back to square one and we have built this losing mentality essentially, especially our home form is just so bad. And we are in the mind state of like losing games doesn't really matter that much. And so that's one of the things that I think Tudor needs to do quite quickly is reestablish the standards. Sean Anthony, who from the new coaching staff has killed the most people? All of them. I reckon they're like a hit squad. They've been taking people out. That's why he's so hard. Like he's not afraid of anything. Andy McKell-Downey. Will the new rumours of financial hemorrhaging lead to a cut rate deal on the stadium naming rights? What percentage of World Cup bound players will miss the last 2 games to avoid injury? Looking at you, Cutie. Okay, so 2 questions in there. I haven't heard anything about the financial hemorrhaging thing, naming rights. I don't want naming. I know we need the money, but it's bad enough the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I just still call it White Hart Lane because that's where it is. I just call it New White Hart Lane. So in a way, I don't want it to be called the Pucker Pies Arena. Do you know what I mean? Or the Bovril Stadium. I don't want it to be called that. Just keep it as it is. Yeah, the World Cup thing's interesting, isn't it? There's always people like getting injured in like the last game of the season and they miss the World Cup. And to be honest, it's one of those where, most pros will tell you, or most people who have played at a good level will tell you, you cannot go into games thinking about not getting injured. It's kind of like jinxing yourself and actually just got to play the way you normally play so that you don't do anything different. But, I can understand if a few players were worried about that. Matt Turnbull, if you could bring back only one player from injury right now and have them immediately match fit, who would it be? I think it's got to be Kulusevski because, one, I think his injury is actually so bad that he genuinely might be finished, which would be really sad because he's a very good player on his day. So if I can just fix him, I'd fix him. Also, we do now need a right winger because we've just lost one, or certainly another number 10. And he kind of can do both of those roles. So I think for me, it's got to be Kulusevski. I am worried about him. So we'll see what's going to happen. Last question from the Todd Father. What can Tudor do in his first match to get the fans onside straight away? I vote for him doing a big WWE-style drop kick of Arteta on the touchline, but that's just me. I do, as I've said many times, I'm a big advocate for violence. So I do think if he just grabs Arteta by the throat, or at least by the sort of scruff of his shirt at a key moment in the game, we love that, won't we? Like, I'm not talking about, and I am joking, by the way, about violence, just for the purposes of comedy. We don't want him to, I don't want him to beat him up. I just want him to physically intimidate him, like get up in his grill, grab him round the sort of, scruff of his neck by his shirt or whatever, and just let him know, like, if I wanted to, I could finish you. I said on the Fighting Cock, a bit like Bane, I just rest your hand on his like shoulder, as if to say, like, at any moment I could just snap you like a twig. That would bring me a lot of joy. I remember Højbjerg, when Arteta was out of his area and Højbjerg come sort of running down the line, and Arteta was getting in his way, and he just sort of squared up to him, and he absolutely bricked it, Arteta. Can you imagine a man like Igor Tudor step into him? He will absolutely brick his pants. So I would love to see that. And I want him to completely disrespect them in the build-up. Like, and sorry, I don't mean disrespect them like outwardly, because I don't want to sort of do a Eze-who like Frank. Just don't mention them, don't talk about them. Just talk about what we're going to do, how we're going to focus on this. Pay them as little mind as possible. Focus on what we're going to do. If we win, however, full disrespect. Oh, they're bottlers. They couldn't even beat little old us. Like, pathetic. They're the worst. They're the worst side I've played against in my managerial career. Like, just proper stick the knife in, Igor. That's all I want. If he does that, then I think he'll do brilliantly. So let's see. I'm kind of excited to watch this game, because it does feel like we've given ourselves half a chance to do something from this. So look, thanks everyone who gave me questions. Thanks to all of you for listening. Every week I get more listeners, and that can only be thanks to you lot sharing it and giving it to people. And I can't thank you enough. Honestly, I'm very grateful for every single person that listens to this pod and listens to me waffle on about Spurs. So thank you so much for joining me. Like I said, next pod, or the end of the month, I'll have another guest on, and we'll do a bit more of a deep dive DNA, and we'll be reviewing the Arsenal game. So if you're not already, please subscribe. And again, please feel free to share the pod with everyone else. And speak to you all very soon. Lots of love. Come on, you Spurs.